Today I want to talk about colons and semicolons and how they're useful for things other than cute little emojis. Colons and semicolons are actually a powerful tool when it comes to organizing information at the sentence level. They connect two sentences that are really the same thought or point in a way that is stronger than if they had been said in two separate sentences. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping writers like you transform your writing so it lingers with readers. Writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. And really that's what all of us writers want, right? We want to be read. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. First, I would like to talk about the rules concerning colons. More often than not, I see colons used in academic and technical writing, but not really many other places. And I don't know if this is because they lend themselves better to that type of writing, or if it's because those writers really have to get their grammar down because people will call them out if they don't. So colons are used to introduce a restatement, an explanation, a list or series, or some other amplification of the text that came before the colon. So a sentence with a colon always begins with an independent clause. That means that the part before the colon could be its own sentence and you wouldn't have to change anything other than just replace the colon with a period and you're good to go. What comes after the colon could be its own sentence, and it could be just as easy to make it into its own sentence, or it could be a phrase or even a single word. Colons accent important points within the text or the sentence, and they're really just another option for organizing the information. And it's a way for the author to control what information the reader gets first. So let's look at some examples. This is a restatement. At the end of it all, he was alone. Not even a breath stirred the air of his house. So when you look at this sentence, both the section before the colon and the section after the colon are saying that he was alone in its own way. But by restating it and saying the house didn't even stir with air, we get a better sense of how alone this guy really is. I'd also like you to note that in a sentence with a colon, if the phrase that comes after the colon is an independent clause, it could be its own sentence, all you'd have to do is replace the colon with period, then the first word after the colon needs to be capitalized. Any other time, it's lowercase. So if it's a phrase or a word, don't capitalize that first word after the colon. But if it could be its own sentence, then it needs a capital. All right, let's look at the next example. So this is an explanation. Vanessa and Charlie had always had only one wish, children. In this sentence, the word after the colon is explaining what that one wish was. Having the children after the colon, I think, adds a lot to the point. The writer could have said Vanessa and Charlie had always only wished for children, but there wouldn't be that pause, and they wouldn't have said that they had only had the one wish, which was children. So organizing the sentence in this way actually creates a lot more punch than if it had been organized really in most other ways. Next, let's look at an example of a colon that introduces a list or a series. The colors of the New Mexico sunset dazzled the visitors: gold, russet, crimson, rose, coral. Well, again, we have a fragment after the colon, so it's not capitalized this time. This sentence could easily be rearranged so that the colors came first, and you would say the colors, gold, russet, coral, so-and-so, of the sunset. But when you arrange it that way, you get the colors before the sunset. So the image that's created in the reader's mind is being created in a different order. With the colon, the reader is said, imagine a sunset, and here are the colors to paint that sunset with. Whereas if you arrange the sentence the other way, you're saying, here's a bunch of colors, now take this mishmash of color and arrange it into the form of a sunset. It's different. Is one way wrong? No. It's just different. And in this case, think the colon is a better option. The image of the sunset is more vivid when the sentence is organized this way. There are two other times colons are commonly used, and I don't think people really think about them in these instances. The first is separating a title and a subtitle. like the title of this video, colons and semicolons, not just for emojis. The colon is saying the first part is the full title, the second part is the subtitle. The other and probably the most universal use of colons is when writing time digitally. So you put the hour, colon, then the minutes. That's used pretty much everywhere. I don't think people even think about that as a colon anymore. It's just the thing that separates the hours from the minutes. We do use colons every day, and we do use them to separate things, just like we can use them to create lists and restatements and explanations within a sentence. Colons are a really powerful tool. They can accent points and give writers another option for organizing the release of information at the sentence level. That's really important and can create quite an impact on readers. They can accent a point, they can create rhythm, they show that connection between the ideas in the two sentences. So just think of the children one. That rhythm, that pause before the word children, really creates an impact on that sentence. Colons show how ideas are related, and if another punctuation mark was used, like a period or the sentence was rearranged, it just wouldn't have the same effect as the sentence does with the colon in it. Now let's move on to the rules of semicolons. There are two major uses for semicolons. The first is to separate items in a list or series that already have commas in them. And the second is to connect coordinate clauses. Let's look at the list one first. I think it's the easiest to understand, and I think it needs the visual of the sentence to really be able to explain it. The finalists came from the Lions Club, Durango, Colorado, the Kiwanis Club, Aztec, New Mexico, and the Dene chapter, Tuba City, Arizona. So in this example, the name of the club, the city, and the state are already separated by commas. So if you put a comma after the state and a reader doesn't know that Durango's a city, they might think that the Lions Club and Durango are both two separate entities, when really they're the same thing. What we do is we separate the items in the list with a semicolon, which is saying that the things that are connected by commas are really the same item, and the semicolon is separating the items. So it actually can be really useful sometimes for clarity. The second use of semicolons is connecting coordinate clauses, and this one is a little bit more nuanced than the first use of semicolons. Semicolons connect two sentences that could be separate sentences but are really the same idea or thought. So it's doing something very similar to colons. And they should always be two independent clauses. So the first part of the sentence with the semicolon should be able to be its own complete sentence. All you would need to do is trade the semicolon for a period. And the second part should also be as easy to turn into its own separate sentence. Semicolons tell the reader that even though these two things could be separate sentences, separate thoughts, they really aren't. They have a deeper connection than that. And a period would be too harsh of a stop between the two. Let's look at an example of this. He not only worries he will never return to the castle in the mist, he worries he won't even remember the palace exists. So first note, there's no capital after the semicolon, even though both of those phrases could be their own separate sentences. So in this sentence, it looks like we're just listing his two different worries and comparing them. But really, these worries are very closely connected. You could almost think of forgetting a place as the extreme version of never returning there again. So in a way, even though these are two different fears, they're kind of at the same time the same fear. And this is an instance when a semicolon is a better choice than a period. Now the next thing I'd like to talk about are using semicolons before conjunctive adverbs. So I'm going to use some English grammar jargon. Don't worry, I'll explain the terms as I go. I just couldn't really come up with a better way of doing it other than introducing these terms. So a conjunctive adverb is something like therefore, however, thus, although. It's a word that we use to separate and connect two thoughts and ideas. So a conjunctive adverb could come after a semicolon and connect two sentences, or it could start its own new sentence. Let's look at an example. The sky roiled with charcoal clouds and the smell of soil. Therefore, I postponed my run. So in this sentence, the semicolon and conjunctive adverb are being used to show how the first part about the storm and the second part about the canceled run are directly related and are kind of a causal relationship. Now, the writer could have done, the sky roiled with charcoal clouds and the smell of soil, period. Capital, therefore I postponed my run. It's not that different, but it's different enough that maybe you do want that semicolon to really drive home the connection between those 2 points. Now I want to note that a conjunctive adverb, like therefore, although, however, is different than a conjunction. A conjunction is a word that separates 2 independent clauses, like but, and, so, yet, those words. And those words need to have a comma, not a semicolon before them. Technically, you cannot start a sentence with but, and, yet, a word like that. That's wrong. Writers do it all the time, and sometimes it's one of those rules that you can break and get away with it. But I will let you know, I know some acquiring editors, so people who pick up books and other writing for publishers. And if you start too many sentences in close proximity with but or and or something like that, they will stick you in the deny pile really fast. That's kind of a pet peeve among editors like that, but also it's kind of laziness. It's basically saying that you as the writer either didn't bother to learn the rule or don't care enough to reorganize your sentence so it's actually correct. Now remember, semicolons can be used to separate items in a list or to connect 2 coordinate clauses. And the connecting of the clauses is more of a nuance and a style choice for the writer than a hard and fast rule like using them in lists is. I'd also like to note that I used to be a clinical allergy specialist, and one of my patients was an elementary school teacher. She explained to me that in Common Core standardized testing, semicolons are kind of like bonus points. So they really encourage their students to use a lot of semicolons because then their test scores go up and the school gets more money. And I wonder if in 10 years we'll start to see a lot more writing with semicolons in it because these kids grew up using semicolons in this way. So keep your eye out for that. I'd like to end with some advice from an editor about colons and semicolons. The general population avoids using semicolons and colons for the same reason that writers do. We don't really remember the rules, or they weren't really covered in our school, and they're these kind of mysterious marks, but they do still understand them at a subconscious level. There's still a pause, and they still know that they're connecting two things. Colons and semicolons are like exclamation points. They should be used sparingly. The more often you use them, the less of an impact they have. And if you use a bunch on one page, it just looks cluttered. To recap, colons introduce a restatement, an explanation, a list or series, or some other amplification of the text. They're also used in time and titles and subtitles. Whereas semicolons are used to separate items in a list and to connect to coordinate clauses. Of course, they both make good smiley faces too. I challenge you to go and look at a piece of your own writing. Maybe it's a work in progress or something you worked on before, and try and find a place where a colon or a semicolon would be effective. Change that sentence or sentences around. How does that affect the point that you were trying to make with those sentences? How does it impact the paragraph as a whole? Colons and semicolons are connections. They show how two ideas are related even though they could be separate sentences. And for that reason, they can be a powerful tool for writers. If you found this video helpful, please like below. And if you have any questions about colons or semicolons, I'd be happy to answer them in the comments section. For more videos like this, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing. And to find out more about me, Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer, go to www.ignitedinkwriting.com. All right, now it's your turn. See how you can use colons and semicolons as tools to help you ignite your ink.